I am an orphan who grew up in an orphanage among other kids who were like me. That orphanage was amongst those who used to receive a generous amount of donations from wealthy families, and the kids who used to come in there also got adopted pretty easily. But I was one of the unlucky ones who never got a foster home. It was not that I did not like staying there. Sisters who used to take care of us were very nice, and the orphanage also had an amazing education system which included all sorts of extracurricular activities such as singing, dancing, sketching, etc. But every orphan kid still longed to get adopted in a family who would prioritize us, and I was one of them. One summer, Sister Emily came to our room with a big smile and a letter in her hand. She told me that my long-lost grandmother, who had been looking for me ever since my birth, had sent a letter for me. I could not understand a single word that was coming out of Sister Emily's mouth. A long-lost grandmother? How was that possible? She handed me the letter. I opened it and started to read. The letter contained the following contents. Dear Theodore, I don't know what name you were given there, but your mother wanted to name you Theodore before her death. I have been looking for you since the day you disappeared after your mother's death. Your father also died due to a heart attack shortly after your mother, and your poor old grandma was only left with their memories in hopes of finding you. I have been looking for you ever since, and there is no place left where I didn't go to look for you. This orphanage is my last hope. So if you are reading this letter and want to see me, please find the contact number written below and give us a call. Someone from our side will come to pick you up. You are the only essence of my family and the heir of our house left. Your loving grandma, Estella. After reading the letter, my eyes got filled with tears and I looked towards Sister to get an answer from her. She told me that the day they found me and the description of the clothes and appearance matched the details they were sent with, so there was a 90% possibility that I was the child they were looking for. They contacted the number written on the letter and informed them about me. After that, preparation for my departure began. I was very attached to everyone at the orphanage, so they all came to send me away with heavy hearts. A black van arrived and two men came out of it. They showed their identity cards to Father and told him that they worked for Grandma Estella. The way they were talking about Grandma Estella, it sounded like she was filthy rich. My luggage was loaded in the van, and I left along with those two gentlemen after saying goodbye to everyone. They told me that we were going to Mexico, which was a very long trip. I may have fallen asleep during the trip, but when I opened my eyes, I heard whispering sounds of one of those men. I'm telling you, ma'am, the kid doesn't look much healthy, so I don't think he will fetch that much money in the market. Okay, I understand, ma'am. Don't worry, I'll bring him by the evening. My whole body froze from what I had heard. I pretended to sleep so that I can hear the rest of their conversation. What did the bitch tell you? It was the voice of the other man. Nothing. She won't leave this half-body kid as well. I know she won't be giving us the 50% as promised, but we have no other choice. After saying that, I felt his gaze towards me, and then he told the other man that he think I am fast asleep. My mind had gone blank by their conversation. I understood that they were not taking me to my grandma's house. In fact, there was no grandma waiting for me. Everything was just a lie, and these were some of those people whom Father had warned us about, the people who kidnap kids and sell them somewhere. I was terrified, and I felt like I would throw up any minute. But if I did, they would find out that I was not sleeping, and I might end up getting hurt by them. As I was thinking about it, they suddenly stopped the van. Hey Marty, I'm gonna ask the locals about gas stations, so keep your eye on the kid. After saying that, one of them left. After about 15 minutes, the other one left as well, saying he needed to pee. It was the perfect opportunity for me to escape from them. I got up and peeked from the door to check if anyone was out there, but after finding no one, I opened the gate and started to run as fast as I could. I did not know if those men came back or if after finding out that I was gone they were following me or not. I just focused my entire strength on running. Whoever I saw on my way, I could only look at them with a suspicious look. I had no idea who I was supposed to trust or whom I could ask for help. That was when I saw a police station and remembered one of Father's lessons. Father told us that the police are there to protect us from every possible crime, so I ran inside that. When I entered, everyone who was present there turned their heads towards me, so I got a bit nervous. That was when a nice-looking man came forward and asked me in a very polite tone, "Who are you, kid? What are you doing here?" As soon as I heard that, I burst into crying. I told them about everything, including the orphanage's name where I grew up in. They called the orphanage and informed them everything. When the nice man was talking to the orphanage, I heard them scolding them while saying that cases like this are on rise these days, so they should have been more careful. After that, they dropped me safely at the orphanage and gave me chocolates to eat as well. A week after the incident, the same nice policeman came to the orphanage and adopted me after completing all the formalities. It's been 2 years since I got adopted, and my foster dad is the best dad I could ever ask for. He provides me with everything, including the best education, toys, even horse riding lessons. I wish every orphan kid could find someone like him. And it's not like I'm not traumatized from that experience, but I'm also grateful for that summer, because due to that incident, I got to find a nice family and experience the beautiful memories with them.
When my boss Rose asked what I'd be up to this 14th of February, I couldn't say I would be drinking in my living room, sitting at my recliner alone while reminiscing about my ex-lover. To make myself look like one of them who would be getting some, I told her I had a date with a hot girl whom I'd met recently. I was sure she bought my lies. I mean, who wouldn't? I have a hunky physique and I'm over 6 feet tall, and just by hearing my voice, women swoop at my feet. Despite that, she had a bitter look on her, almost as if she was hoping I would say I was spending time alone that day. I couldn't care less about her feelings more than mine, so I went to my desk to finish up my work. There were times when I caught my boss's eye lingering on me more than they should, but I never thought of it much. Thoughts of Aria, the love of my life who passed away 2 years ago due to an unknown cause, had already occupied my heart, mind, and soul to think of another woman. However, I knew if I were to say that I was still hung up on her, people would think I was pathetic. That was why I would try to avoid others, thinking I was single, and would tell them every once in a while that I had a date. That evening, when I was getting off work, Rose called me in her office and asked me to help her with some work. I was butt tired and didn't want to do it, but after working here for the past 6 years, I learned that if you want to work without any trouble, you should never piss your boss off. So I agreed. The work she was making me do was mostly hers, which was piled up. It made me wonder if she ever even did them. Weirder was that she was not helping me finish up her shit. Instead, she just sat on her comfy couch. An hour went by and I was exhausted. That was when I saw her placing a cup of coffee in front of me and said, "Drink up," before returning to her couch. I was so frustrated that I wanted to throw the damn coffee at her face. But I controlled myself and started sipping it. Normally, drinking coffee made my sleep disappear, but that time it was doing the opposite. I started to feel even drowsier and didn't even realize when I passed out. When I woke up, I was having a throbbing headache, and as I returned to my senses, I realized my body was covered with bruises while I was butt naked. Panicked, I got up and scanned my surroundings, trying to make sense of what was happening. That was when I started getting minor flashes of what happened last night. I immediately got up, picked up my shattered clothes, and dressed up. And as I was about to head out, Rose entered with a seductive smile, which only felt disgusting, and reminded me of how she forced herself on me last night. I stomped to her and grabbed her arms tightly before asking, "What did you do?" She acted shy upon my question and responded, "It was not just me who did it." She then slipped her dress, revealing the bite marks on her body. "Just don't call me Natalie next time when we are making love." The moment she mentioned my ex's name, I got enraged and grabbed her by the hair. Next time, you won't be alive if you try anything." As I growled that, she let out a moan, stating she liked it, but it only made me feel more disgusted. I turned around and dashed out of her office and then the building. Once I reached home, I went to take a bath. I tried rubbing her filthy marks off of me, but it was of no use. That evening, I typed in my resignation letter and sent it to HR. I started looking for a new job, luckily within 2 days. The pay was not as much as the last one, but it was still good. It was finally Valentine's Day, and I felt filthy every time I recalled the events of that night. I wanted to drown in my sorrow and forget about everything, only remembering my good memories with my angel. As I opened the refrigerator, I realized I had only 4 beer bottles and it wasn't enough to make me forget about what happened. I grabbed my car keys and went to the store to buy some more beer. After returning, I put on our tape and started watching my beautiful girl while drinking. That was when I heard someone laughing behind me. I turned around only to be horrified upon seeing Rose. She looked at me and said while holding her laughter, "Is that whom you had a date with? Your dead ugly girlfriend?" Her laugh was like nails to my ears, piercing and painfully, and before I knew it, I felt something red in front of my eyes, and the next thing I knew, I was sitting on top of Rose, rearranging her face. I punched her to my heart's content, but the psycho kept laughing and making an expression as if she was enjoying getting hit by me. I grabbed her by the neck and began choking her. She was still smiling, but when it started getting harder for her to breathe, she realized I wasn't joking when I warned her about killing her. As I saw her expression changing into a horror with each passing second as her feeble life slipped away, I started feeling better. I turned around and watched the scene where Natalie and I were dancing together, playing on the screen. Tears started slipping out of my eyes as I uttered, my voice barely above a whisper, "Don't worry, my love. I promise to be only yours forever."
Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so.
I met someone who looked awful lot like my ex-girlfriend, almost as if they were twins separated at birth. However, from what she had told me, their ethnicity was different, so it made that impossible. I figured she must have been a doppelganger. Anyway, this new girl's name was Caroline, and judging from our first date, she seemed nice. We started texting each other regularly. The conversations we would have always would be interesting and pretty engaging, despite her occasional questions about my beliefs in demons. Initially, I thought she was joking about that, but then one day, something happened that left a lifelong scar on my mind. The date was the 14th of February, and since it was my first Valentine's with Carol, I had been planning a big surprise for her. She did mention something about not liking surprises, but I thought it wouldn't be a big deal, and besides, what girl doesn't like romantic surprises from her boyfriend? I called her out on a date, and instead of taking her to the restaurant, I started driving to a different location. "Where are we going?" she asked, nervousness visible in her face. "You'll soon find out," I said in an excited tone. She grabbed my face. "Hey!" I screamed in pain as I yanked it to face her and asked in a low, terrifying growl, "Tell me where we are going, Alex, now!" For some reason, I got a feeling that if I did not tell her, she could end me without hesitation. "It's a private pool I booked for a Valentine's Day surprise," I blabbered quickly. She looked at me dead in the eye, taking a brief pause before asking, "Is there more?" I hesitantly nodded, and she didn't have to say anything for me to feel threatened. Her gaze was enough for me to spill everything in detail. Her expression changed as she cheerfully said, "I'd love that. See, this isn't bad. Just never plan surprises and we're all good." For some reason, her behaving that way felt even more terrifying to me. She didn't seem the nice girl I thought she was. Instead, the way she threatened me seemed there was something wrong with her head. I tried shaking it off, and now that she had ruined my surprise, my mood had ruined too. It would have been better if I had just taken her to that restaurant. Though I was angry and mildly scared, she was still my girlfriend, and I had already spent my money on booking that place. Quietly, I drove to the destination, and finally, after what felt like an eternity, we arrived at the opulent poolscape. My initial expectations were to enjoy her surprise yet excited reaction, but seeing her bland reaction, I lost the remaining excitement I had in me. Once we settled down, she went to change into the swimsuit I'd bought for her, and since I had my swimsuit underneath, all I needed to do was take off my clothes. Once she returned from the changing room, I couldn't help but notice the uncanny resemblance she had with my ex. Even their body shapes were the same. It made me wonder if there could be my doppelganger somewhere as well. The server brought out the wine I had ordered, and we put our feet inside the water. There was no way I was going to let the day go to waste, so I leaned in for a kiss. Surprisingly, she immediately kissed me back, unlike how she used to hesitant before. My hands started to explore her body, and as I slowly slid my hand to unhook her swimsuit, I felt her flinch. But since she didn't object, I continued. This was the first time I was being intimate with her, but for some reason it felt familiar, as if I had done this before. As I was kissing her neck, my eyes stuck to a fading scar on her neck. My mind started spinning as I realized, Rosa? I felt her halting her movements as I uttered the name, which confirmed my suspicions. You... As I began speaking, I felt her grabbing my head and putting it underwater with full force, attempting to drown me. I heard her saying something along the lines, this was the only way. The madness in her eyes made me remember why I broke up with her in the first place. I couldn't believe she went as far as surgery to get back together. I struggled to get away from her grip and somehow managed to grab her hair and pull her into the pool. We fought for control for about half an hour before I finally managed to put her head in the water. Unable to think clearly as I gasped for air, I continued to push her until I felt her stop struggling. As I released her, she started drowning. Panicked, I pulled her out of the water and put her on the poolside. I checked her pulse, but I couldn't tell if she was alive or not. I was too terrified to do anything, so instead of taking her to the hospital, I quickly got up and rushed to change my clothes before heading to the car. Getting in, I put the car keys in and started it into the ignition. Then I quickly drove away. As I was escaping, I realized if someone had found her dead, I would get in trouble. Damn it! I turned the car around and went back to check up on her. However, when I reached, she wasn't there. I started panicking even more, unable to think of what to do next as I wondered if she walked out on her own or if somebody took her body. I ran back to my car and didn't stop until I reached my apartment. Though I never saw her after that and have no idea if she's alive or not, there hasn't been a day by when I don't get her nightmares.
Robert? Robert! What is up with that site? Why do you always seem to spend your time on these days? I screamed in frustration when he ignored me for the 5th time in a row. I used to do volunteer work at local orphanages and foster homes, and my brother was the one who used to drive me there. But ever since he found this weird website, he's been ignoring me. I don't remember what its name was, but I do know that it starts with 4. He still didn't hear my screams and continued giggling over whatever he was reading on that site. When he didn't give up after 15 more minutes of waiting, I took my bag and got out of the house. I was going to do volunteer work in a foster home today, which was just around the town's border. I had already received a warning about the warden being too strict, along with a suggestion to stay careful in front of her. As I entered what seemed like a slum instead of a house, each corner looked dirty. The clothing on the children's bodies seemed old and washed up, as if they had only owned a single pair for years. But to my surprise, the warden's behavior seemed extra nice, and not just with me, but with the children of the foster home as well. I could tell it was all just an act, and her masked expressions were so obvious that even the jumpy children around here were giving away the way she might be treating him. I was given the task of cleaning the place, cooking for the kids, and playing with them. So looking at the condition of the house, I went to what looked like a storage room, dug out cleaning supplies, and started scrubbing the place. Trust me, it took me more than half a day to make the house look livable again, and as I was cleaning, a girl around the age of 11 kept asking if she could help with anything. At first, she looked afraid in approaching me, but when she saw I was being nice to her, she opened up a bit and started roaming around. There was another kid, a boy around the age of 14, who kept following the girl silently, and the way he was scowling at me, it looked like he was following her to protect her from me. When I was done cleaning, I went to the kitchen to see what could be cooked, but I couldn't find any ingredients except for a few pieces of dry bread in the cabinet. If I didn't see these kids living here with my own eyes, I would have presumed this house to be abandoned. It looked like the warden didn't give a damn about the kids and treated them worse than an animal. I couldn't let the poor kids starve on my watch, so I went to the nearest grocery store to buy some ingredients, and when I had brought enough for all of them, I headed back to the foster home. Upon reaching, I went straight to the kitchen and started making some vegetable soup along with mac and cheese, since these were the only things that I excelled in. The rest of the things that I bought was instant food, and so when I was done preparing the food, I went to ask the little girl where they used to dine. The look she gave me in response was shocking. It was as if she didn't know what a proper meal was. What in the world were these poor kids living on? Didn't they inspect this foster home even? After setting up the food on the floor properly, I called all the children to eat. The way they started eating made me feel even more pity on them. It was as if they were hungry for ages. By the time everyone was done eating, I was already late, so I didn't have time to play with them anymore. So after promising them that I would return to check on them, I exited the foster home. After walking a few meters distance, I noticed that I had forgotten my bag in their kitchen, so I silently went back inside, only to meet with what I would define as the growling sounds of that warden that even I started trembling for a few seconds. She might have been punishing a kid, and even though I wanted to jump in, I remembered the warning Ella gave me, so I quietly walked into the kitchen and grabbed my bag. I thought leaving would have been just as easy as entering, but I was wrong. I remember running toward the warden's room after hearing an ear-piercing scream which sounded off that sweet girl who was with me all day. My feet couldn't stop thinking that the cruel woman might be striking the poor girl, but what I was met with was beyond terrifying. The guy who followed this little girl was standing over the woman who was bleeding from her head. In his hand was the shovel that I had put in the storeroom that was beside the warden's room after scraping the front lawn. There was blood on it still. She seemed only unconscious and not dead. The girl's face had fresh bruises and her lips were bleeding, so I figured the warden did raise her hand on her. I could tell just by looking at her face that she was fighting back tears. I knew I had to step in, but before I could move forward to help, the boy started hitting the warden's head again, leaving everyone, including me, petrified. As he was about to strike again, I shook myself and walked forward, slapping the shovel away from his hand. At least that's how I pictured it would go. But as I slapped his hand, the handle of the shuttle made his hands bleed. He turned his face towards me with rage in his eyes. The boy who had just smashed the warden of this foster home's skull was now chasing after me. I couldn't believe this was happening. I was being hunted for life by a 14-year-old. What sort of has gone through this kid that turned him into something this terrifying? As the boy ran after me toward the stairs, the trembling voice of the girl with bleeding lips stopped the both of us in our tracks. "Don't hurt her, brother." After saying that, he started sobbing loudly. I rushed to her side and embraced her in an attempt to calm the poor girl down. As her crying stopped, I moved to check the warden's pulse, and luckily she was alive. I immediately called 911 and explained the situation, along with how she continuously abused the kids. She was taken to the hospital to get treatment, while I called Ella to inform her of everything. After assuring me that she would take care of it and make sure these kids are sent to a better foster home, she disconnected the call. The children had plenty of food for the night, so after promising them that I would come back the next day, I finally headed home. But what was even worse than all of this was that my brother's head was still stuck inside the website, oblivious to what I had just been through. Without saying a word, I stomped to my bedroom and slammed it shut, leaving him in his world.
Who doesn't love plushies when they are a kid? I, for one, was obsessed with them. And then the ones who could respond to voice commands and speak hundreds of words came into trend. I threw a fit until I got one. I remember playing with them for months before I got bored, and it ended up in the bottom of my old toy box. The box contained the toys that I no longer played with, and since it got filled, Mom put the box into the storeroom. An entire year passed. I turned 13, and everyone forgot about the box while my toys were being donated to the orphanage. I grew out of my obsession with toys and plushies and started playing with makeup and stuff. First, let me tell you about the storeroom in our house. It was this useless attic on the second floor that we never used, so Mom would stock the useless items, or the ones we rarely used there, in hopes that someday someone would use them. That day when Mom finally decided to clean the store, she found my old toy box, and I had no idea why she put it in my room. I wouldn't even have noticed the box if it wasn't for what happened that night. Something that sends shivers down my spine every time I remember it. I was playing games and chatting with my friends on my computer when I felt I heard a noise. Startled, I turned around and scanned the room to see if any of my siblings had entered. Upon meeting with complete silence, I thought maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. Returning my focus to the conversation my friends were having, I shrugged it off. Perry was telling a brand new gossip about the guy who had recently transferred to our school. Some were saying his entire family was murdered, and now he was living with his uncle, even though it was baseless. I was typing my reply when the sound of something falling startled me. As I turned around to see the darkness of my room, which for some reason was now giving off ominous vibes, my eyes trailed to the source, only to find a box sitting in the corner of my room. I reached my hand to the board and flicked a switch, making the light spread across my room. Then I got up and walked to the toy box, where I found one of the toys had fallen out of the box. Hesitantly, I picked it up and placed it back inside. "Mom, why is this box in my room?" I screamed the question, knowing my mom was in the kitchen. When she didn't respond, I walked downstairs and asked again. "Oh, I completely forgot to tell you. Check if there's anything you need in there before I donate those." After saying that, she returned to preparing for the next day's breakfast. I signed before saying okay and going back to my room. I went through the box briefly, and since there was nothing I could use, I made my way to my little sister Haley's room. After telling her to check the box and see if there was anything she wanted, I went to the living room to watch TV. After about half an hour, Haley walked into the living room and made herself comfortable on the couch before saying, "There's nothing I want. Your toys are old and boring. In comparison, mine is way better." I rolled my eyes at her words and returned my focus to the program I was watching. "What in the world are you two doing? You have school tomorrow, for goodness sake. Go to your beds right this instant." Yes, it was our mom who gave us a scolding the moment she noticed us watching television. As I entered the room, my eyes were the pair of artificial ones of the pink Furby doll sitting on my bed. Filled with frustration as to why Haley put the damn toy on my bed if she didn't want it, I picked it up and threw it back in the box. That was when I heard it say, "Feed me." Thinking I probably pushed some button that made it speak, I ignored it. I couldn't help but wonder if I ever heard it say that, but then I thought I must have forgotten even if it did. Shrugging it off, I went to bed. But for some reason, I couldn't help but feel scared. The box and the Furby toy kept lingering in my mind until I eventually fell asleep. I can't recall what time of night it was, but my sleep was disrupted when I heard someone whispering into my ears. Upon opening my eyes, I was met with the gleaming eyes of my pink toy, and it seemed it was smiling. I had never felt that scared of anything in my life, as I let out an ear-piercing scream and threw the toy off the bed. The Furby continued to say random words on a loop, but the moment my mom and sibling entered the room, it stopped. When they asked what was wrong, I pointed at the toy and told them that it kept talking on its own. Mom glanced at the toy in confusion before looking back at me and said, "Is this one of your pranks, Alice?" Bewildered by her words, I asked, "What?" But before I could finish my sentence, she told me that the toy didn't have any batteries, so there was no way it could speak. However, her revealing that wasn't comforting, but terrifying, and I couldn't help but suspect the eerie occurrences that helped happening since the event. Mom, please take it away," I begged, the fear visible in my eyes which made her look at me worried. She nodded her head before she put the toy back in the box and took the box away. I slept in Haley's room that night, though the toys were all donated the very next day. I couldn't help but spook myself every time I thought of that haunted toy, wondering if it always had been that way.
It started out as a nice day in 1973. Mom was paying 50 cents for a small quart-sized bucket of black raspberries. So I had recruited two of the other kids in the neighborhood, Dwight Vanover and Tim Mitchell, to help pick what we have been picking in the field about 300 yards in the back of the house for probably a couple of hours. The field we're picking from might have been a cleared field at one time, but now it hosted huge berry bushes, and a ton of small bush-like trees could be found sticking up about 10 or 15 feet. These were all small trees, though, with the larger, older ones along an old, fallen-over fence around the border of the field. They were actually out beyond my folks' backyard, to the side of another mowed yard, and we had walked about halfway down the neighbor's backyard, then cut over the fence and gone a couple of 100 feet out into the field to get to the best bushes. We had already each filled our buckets at least once, and were trying desperately to fill them once more before sunset. As far as Mom knew, I wanted the money to go buy a pop at the Lawson store downtown. But I was really planning on going to the liquor store and buying a pack of cigarettes. I knew they'd let me buy them because I'd done it for my dad in the past. They didn't even bother to take the note that Dad had given me to give them, so I still had it and planned to use it again. The sky had darkened quite a bit, but we were determined to get that last bucket done. I was farther out in the field toward the center when I saw something strange in front of me. It was a silver ball, but I have no idea how big it was. It could have been hundreds of feet or inches across. Or it could have been the size of a baseball. I really didn't know if it hadn't been moving. I might not have even seen it. They're amongst the weeds, but they begin moving in a very strange pattern. From where I was standing, it looked exactly like it was bouncing along the top of the berry bushes from left to right. I remember thinking at that time, and still remembering it that way today, as being like that little bouncing ball that used to appear on the television when there were words for a song shown and it was going in time with the music. I didn't know what it was, but I had thought maybe it was a ball that had been thrown, or perhaps a frisbee on its side glancing off objects. But we were out in the field, away from anyone else. And in that direction, there was nothing but more berry bushes, trees, and fields. Although there are buildings in that direction now, at that time, there weren't any. I called the rest of the guys over and told them about what I had seen. Tim was skeptical and made a few wisecracks of dumb me wearing glasses. But Dwight made me go over every detail. He wanted to know what it was, and even started to go that way, even though the bush was very thick, and he literally had to make a path. I would have already gone that way further to get berries, but the way was blocked. And Dwight was a tough one, and he began pushing his way through. It was really getting dark by now, and a beautiful red sunset began to spread out amongst the clouds. Dwight was still pressing into the bushes and hadn't gone very far when we began to hear a sound. There was the sound of something coming through the weeds at us, and it sounded heavy yet quiet at the same time. There was just the sound of berry branches being crushed, and occasionally a popping or snapping as a small tree would go over. The bushes around us were tall, taller than us, and we couldn't really see what was going on or what direction it was coming from. But one thing we knew for sure, it was getting a lot louder. It had increased in volume so quickly and so much that I yelled for everyone to run. And we all ran as fast as we could to the tree line that marked the edge of the field. I remember we all burst out of the weeds, and at about the same time. It was a relief to be standing on mowed grass, even though we were still so far from the house. And then we heard it again. It was still coming our way. And by that time, we were all very scared. Everyone took off running again, with me being in the back. We only had to go about 50 feet to get to the edge of my folks' backyard, but it was getting darker by the second. Tim was still in the front of me, but I think Dwight veered off to go around the other side of the house to make a sprint for his house across the street. While Tim and I tried to go through the front door of my house, Tim and I were still carrying the buckets that we had been collecting berries in. But as I reached the corner of our backyard, Tim stopped and turned back towards me. I know I felt good about that. I can recall because he could have kept going, but he didn't. When he caught sight of me, I caught his eye. But then, the woodpile next to me started making sounds. Mostly, there were branches that had been thrown over there over a period of time. Some were small, others were a couple of inches in diameter, and all the pile was about chest high to me, and started becoming denser over time. As soon as the noises started, Tim dropped his bucket and took off running. But I hesitated. This was my yard. Surely it wouldn't come into my yard. The woodpile had made some loud cracking noises, and that's when I saw it. I've never seen anything like it before, since I have seen many things that remind me of it though, and every time I'm thrown back even now to the gulf of 50 years to look once again at it. If it had hair, and it was in coils atop its head, and being in the glare of the sunset with the sun going down behind it, the thing looked for all the world to have an exposed brain. The convolution of its head was all highlighted in red, most everything else was shattered to black. Its eyes were strange and seemed idle and overlapped with something like goggles over them. Those I can only see highlights of at most. It was totally hidden in the shadow of its mouth in that area. I couldn't see anything, but lower down, I could see an extremely thin neck. It looked segmented like a flexible conduit pipe and tinted the reddy red of the setting sun. Once it came up above the woodpile, I got one solid look, but it was fast. It had struck its head up so fast. It was there at least a second before I dropped my bucket and took off running after Tim. So great was my friend at that point. Then I caught up and almost passed him as we came up to the side of the house. Mom was in the kitchen as we came bursting through the door, but but didn't scold us when she saw the fright on our faces. Right away, she called the Vanovers to see that Dwight had made it home safely. After we all calmed down, Tim insisted that he was okay to ride his blue Stingray down the street to his house if Mom and I would come out and watch him ride home. Our road did have streetlights, so we could see him pedaling home as fast as he could. Then later, we talked on the phone for a while. The next day, my dad called me back to the woodpile. There was my berry bucket where I had dropped it. But it was the woodpile he wanted to show me. The pile was almost broken into, with both sides looking as though they had been grasped and ripped apart. My dad gave me one of those weird looks and asked if I was sure that I didn't do that. But at the look on my face, he just left it be that my dog was also in the backyard at the same time. I don't remember hearing her bark the whole time that we were out there, although she wasn't one of those barking dogs, really. And, needless to say, I was careful to feed the dog in the daytime for quite a while. What happened to me sent me down a path. One thing to consider: when we were out in the field, it was light enough to see to pick berries. However, at the dead run for young boys, after about maybe 300 or 400 feet from where we were picking to the corner of the backyard, it became the last vestiges of sunset. It wasn't until years later that I considered it and actually sat outside and waited between the two. I came up with a 20-minute lapse of time, so there was also a missing time element there too. I didn't write this up until many years later, but it haunts my dreams. A while later, Mansfield, Ohio was hit with a huge UFO flap. Something else was in the description of that thing. It was the speed of it popping up in the woodpile. Once, many years later, I was watching Star Wars when they were trapped in that garbage thing when the head of that worm thing popped up. Although the head was different, I had an immediate flashback. The head was overly large for the neck, and the sunset was behind it, causing it to have a red light all around it. Because I only looked long enough to register what it was, only a kind of glimpse of a head that had corrugations on top. Something like the convoluted brain, or perhaps dreadlocks with red light shining down it. And for a very young boy, it's been the thing of nightmares for around 50 years. I just felt that it was the right time to tell this.
So back when I was growing up, I had a bunch of unsavory stuff happen to me and ended up being placed in a foster home. Well, technically, it was basically a holding cell for kids to live until they found a real home, because I was a hurt and untrusting kid. At that point, I cycled through my fair share of families. I stayed with an obese single man who I don't remember much about, but I do remember very bad vibes while staying in his house. My case manager must have thought so too, because I went to another family shortly after. This is when I met the family. More specifically, the sob that the story is about. This wouldn't be my last home, and I didn't live there long at all. So things have gotten foggy over the years, but I was probably around 8 and 10 years old. It was a full house, 6 of us in total. My foster mother and father, 2 brothers, and a sister. The only person I did not like straight out the gate was my sister. You know that feeling where you just know someone wants you off the earth? For me, it feels especially raw when it seems unjustified. Like, I know I was technically a foreign invader cancer cell in their home, but guess what? I was a mouthy brat too, and I gave her the attitude right back. So it goes without saying, she and I never got along. My brothers, on the other hand, I love them. We did everything together. They made me feel completely a part of the family, which is what made what they did to me so confusing. So far, the only slightly unusual thing about this family was that they had intercom system in their house. Mostly our mother would use it to tell us to sleep after hours. A few months go by, and summer rolls around. They had been pumping me up about a swimming pool in the backyard for a while. The only thing was that it didn't have a lot of normalcy. I didn't even remotely know how to swim and was terrified at open water. On the day it happened, my brother and I were all by the pool. They also had a slide they used for the pool and went straight into the deep end. Looking back, that entire afternoon looked so set up, like the family planned this or something. I swear, they kept pressuring me to try the slide and that they would save me if I couldn't swim to the sides. I really wanted to be like them, free to do things without worrying about consequences. And I really believed they wouldn't let me drown. We were family, right? Okay, great. So I slid down into the ball. Seconds later, I start to drown. I don't know which way is up, and I'm fighting for air, for something to grab, anything. Well, it seems like it went on for way too long. And suddenly, my adoptive father has me barely above the water, holding me up with one hand. If at gunpoint I had to describe his face, I would say it was a demonic mix of lust and contempt. It was really blurry and happened fast, but bases like that are hard to forget. I could tell you drown right now, boy. That's what he said to me, those exact words. I don't quite recall what he referred to me as before that point, but I know it wasn't boy. I was crying and gasping for air, and he just held me there, holding the inches above the water, for what I still don't get why. This was one of 3 or 4 times in my life that I truly believed that I was going to die. Could be worse, I guess, but anyways. Eventually, he walked over to the edge of the pool and let me go right down. I was so terrified of him, I didn't know what to do. I just laid there and didn't want to be near anyone in that house. I remember one of the strangest things about that experience was the aftermath. We went to a Mexican restaurant at night, and though they all acted like nothing happened, I was confused, angry, and scared. Maybe it was insignificant to them. Maybe it was not an abnormal thing to them, or he did it to teach me a lesson or something. Anyways, forget that, and forget that family. Soon after, I updated my case manager on all that mess, and I was out of that house within days, if I recall correctly. All you people with both parents, try to make things right with them if they aren't. Always appreciate your family, because I don't have any. And to be honest, life sucks.
Back when I was in my early 20s, I met a girl who set my entire world on fire. She was smart, beautiful, and had passion for art. "We're gonna burn together," she'd say. Not in the literal sense, of course. It's just that romance that we got swept up in was without a doubt the most intense thing I'd ever been involved in with my entire life. It was like a wildfire just burning out of control. Nothing had topped it before, and nothing has topped it since. But let's just say that neither of us were in a particularly good place in our lives, and as passionate as the relationship was, it wasn't exactly healthy for the most part. She was very, very possessive, and I'm not going to lie, I thought that was kinda hot at first. But that got really old, really fast, and her behavior started to cause arguments between us. She would explode at the mention of any other girl. I once mentioned something to do with my sister, and she immediately interrupted to accuse me of being unfaithful. Even after I explained the girl I was talking about was my sister, she stayed mad. It just defied all logic, but I was in love, so I stayed with her. So we're together for 17.5 months, and that time included some of the best and worst moments of my life so far. But in the end, the bad started to outweigh the good, and faced with another Valentine's Day with her, I decided I couldn't do it anymore. I made the decision to break up with her, and as you might imagine, she did not take it very well at all. At first, she was in complete denial, saying that there was nothing wrong with our relationship and that she had no idea why I was trying to break up. Then she got angry, like really angry, started throwing around accusations and threats, none of which I thought that she was capable of acting on. Then came the tears and the final acceptance, by far the hardest part for me. She was crazy, but I didn't think she was a bad person, and it sucked to have to hurt her like that. She insisted on staying in touch, maybe staying friends or something, but I had to go no contact. It was the only way we'd really get over each other. I felt like a monster, but I did it anyway. About a month goes by and I'm sitting in my apartment, alone on Valentine's Day. I'm sort of over this girl, but I'm also sort of not, and with it being Valentine's Day, I'm thinking about her a whole lot. So when my phone buzzes and I see it's a text from her, I'm like rushing to see what it says. I deleted her number, but you know when you just always remember the last 4 digits of someone's number? Yeah, that. So all this message says is, we were supposed to burn together. And that just kind of broke my heart right there. I thought about calling her, maybe try and patch things up, and in retrospect, maybe that's exactly what I should have done. But in the moment, I just tried to stay strong and stick to the no contact rule. I tried to take my mind off stuff, stayed away from all the romantic movies and Valentine's episodes that the TV networks were trying to force down my throat. But still, I just couldn't shake the lonely feeling I had in me. So later that night, I'm kind of intoxicated, just sitting on the couch when my phone buzzes again. I just know it's her, like knew it in my gut, and surprise, surprise, it was. I debated just quickly clearing the notification and ignoring the message, but my curiosity got the better of me and I found myself reading it. I knew the first line said, "We were supposed to burn together," again from the notification, but only when I opened up the whole thread did I see that underneath the first part, it just said, "But now you're going to burn alone." Again, it hit me right in the feels. It was incredibly clingy, I know, but at the same time, you can't even deny how poetic that is. Poetry, that's all I thought it was. Just that old metaphor we used to share. I didn't think that she'd take it as far as she did. I didn't think she meant literally burn. Because sometime after that, I'm on my couch and I just started smelling smoke. I go through the stages of like thinking I've drunkenly forgotten that I'm cooking, then thinking the neighbors are burning food on accident, then thinking someone is making a campfire outside or something. Just pure denialism, really, not wanting to believe that the apartment building was actually on fire. Then the fire alarm starts going off. I rush downstairs in no shoes or socks, just a pair of shorts and a t-shirt, and run out the back of the building to the fire escape point. And on the way, I see smoke billowing out from under the door of the apartment below me. Minutes later, a fire truck is parked outside of the apartment building, spraying water into the apartment below me, which had been absolutely scorched. It was one of the more surreal experiences of my life. These firemen are asking me if I'm okay, if I needed one of those foil blankets. It was February and it was freezing outside. But all that could come out of my mouth is like, "I know who did this. I know who did this." One of them tells me to get in touch with the police if the cause of the fire was criminal, so I immediately do because, like I said, I had a good idea of who set that fire in the first place. Like I wasn't quite sure how'd she done it, but having my ex-girlfriend text me like, You're going to burn alone, and then all of a sudden there's a house fire? That was a no coincidence to me. No coincidence at all. And over the next couple of weeks, I had to go and stay in my mom's place while some renovation work was undertaken at my smoke-damaged apartment. But I did get in touch with the police, who thanked me for the tip and said that they'd get in touch with me if the cause of the fire was found to be arson. Only it wasn't. They called a little while later to say that a fire department investigator had determined that some faulty wiring was to blame for the blaze, and so they wouldn't need any testimony from me. I brought up the text messages my ex had sent me, how her words seemed to precede the fire in a way that was just too apt to be coincidence. But again, they insisted that no arson was to blame. I even called her and texted her saying that I knew what she had done, that she wouldn't get away with it. But as you can imagine, she played dumb, saying things like, "I don't know what you're talking about. You shouldn't be contacting me." It's something that messes with me to this day, and there are so many unanswered questions that frankly, I'm not sure I want to know the answers to. I just know that one moment she's texting me, telling me I'm going to burn, and the next, my apartment building's on fire. I'm not saying my ex broke into the apartment downstairs and did something to the wiring, but it's even crazier of me to suggest that she willed something like that to happen, or like engineered it or something. I know how paranoid that sounds, so I tend not to put that theory out much, but it had such a profound effect on my mind that I still moved apartments not long after, just to be safe. Because to me, there's still something very frightening about that time in my life, something I can't quite explain. And now when I remember that old, like, we're going to burn together, it doesn't set me alight anymore. All it does is make my blood run cold. I only write this because I think it might give people an idea of the kind of thinking that goes on inside the head of a stalker. So, although I've never been stalked, my past is littered with behavior that people might call obsessive and controlling. There are many different kinds of stalking, you see, and in professional terms, not all obsessive or fixated behavior really qualifies as stalking. I suppose what I'm really trying to say with this opening is, I used to be a stalker, and this is my story. I first began to experience feelings of fixation in my first year of old sixth form college. There was this girl named Emma who sat opposite me in English class. All the desks were arranged in a kind of horseshoe shape, and I used to stare at her from across the room, sometimes so deeply that I'd disassociate and be unable to remember a thing the teacher had said. I always tried to avoid getting caught, of course. The last thing I wanted was to scare her. I thought I was in love, you see, and I suppose in my mind I was just gearing up to ask her out. But it wasn't about sharing her company for a few hours on a date somewhere. No. I wanted to own her. I needed her to be mine. I played it cool enough to get her number during spring term, and I called her one night after school to try to arrange a date. She didn't answer her phone, so I just kept calling and calling, thinking if she wanted to arrange a date, she'd answer eventually, right? This is back when I was still using my parents' landline to call people, so I'm hitting the redial button over and over again whenever the line went dead. I didn't see anything wrong with it. I didn't think for a moment that seeing the missed call count tick over into double digits would freak her out. And what's more, I just couldn't help myself either. Like I sort of knew I was being a bit impatient and that maybe I should chill, but still, I just couldn't stop calling. As you can imagine, my pursuit of Emma came to absolutely nothing. But I think I was too fresh to really do anything about it, other than remain a doting admirer from afar. And besides, it wasn't all that long before I was off to university, which brought a whole campus's worth of new girls to obsess over. The next girl, Jay, lived in the same halls of residence as me, just a few doors down from my room. She was the sweetest, most beautiful creature I'd ever laid my eyes on, and I got those exactly same feelings of wanting to own her as I did from Emma from English class. Only this time, they were considerably more intense. Not so much because I liked her any more or less than Emma, but being at university gave me this almost subconscious sense that I could do anything I wanted, There were no teachers watching us, no camera in our dorm rooms to watch us while we slept. She was mine for the taking, and it's that kind of predatory behavior that I've learned to recognize in myself, and I have to work very hard to see it sometimes, as it's just second nature to think that way. That's why I'm so different from other people, I suppose. They have this little angel on their shoulder to counter the devil on the other, whereas I just have two devils that are disguised as their more celestial cousins. I figured the best way to win her over was to find out as much as I could about her, then employ that knowledge in a way that would impress her. So when I added her on Facebook and proceeded to pore over her posts and picture histories, I told myself it was a noble pursuit. I was putting in work that would eventually result in her being extremely, extremely happy. I mean, if someone took the time to get to know what I loved most, then got me a present based on that, I'd be over the moon. My therapist has said this is somewhat true, but then asked if I could see where I went wrong picking Jay's present. At first I couldn't, but now I can. Let me see if you can too. So like I said, I spent hours at a time obsessing over her social media. Every single thing she posted, shared, retweeted, or liked going back years on a variety of different accounts. I saw it all and I made notes of every pertinent piece of information. But above all, I recognized how close she'd been with a grandma who'd passed away in her early teens. Every year on a particular date, Jay would post something about her Nana. It usually came with an old picture of her, sometimes with a baby Jay included too. This is how I noticed that Jay's grandmother kept a large variety of stuffed animals in her home, and one in particular seemed to be Jay's favorite. It was an old, scabby-looking handmade woolen doll, one with raggedy red dress and a missing eye. But perhaps its most defining feature were the tumbles of white woolen hair that came spilling from the top of the doll's head. This was probably why it was Jay's favorite, and one of the pictures was a collage of photos showing her tying a baby blue ribbon into the doll's hair. The caption read something like, "Rest in peace, Nana, GBNF. Still wish I had my Molly doll. It reminds me of you so much. XXXX. Bingo. The perfect gift idea, I thought. Surely if someone managed to get her a similar-looking doll, complete with the blue ribbon, she'd fall head over heels for them. I mean, how could you not? It had to be the most thoughtful gift in the history of gifts. Since I had some money left over from Christmas, I got to work looking for someone who could make me a similar kind of doll. Giving online vendors an idea of what I wanted was easy enough, after all. I think I had about 6 or 7 quite clear photographs of it. You'd be shocked at how easy it was, honestly. There are lots of little artists out there who are more than happy to work commissions, especially when there's such a rich digital record to work with. I had my replica Molly doll within a month of me first inquiring about it, and my God, it was perfect. It looked very new, obviously, not nearly as aged and time-worn as the original, and the artist had done a very good job of it otherwise. Then once the baby blue ribbon was tied in its hair, the transformation was complete. It looked so much like the original, it was frightening. Emphasis on frightening, though, and you'll see what I mean in a minute. Since me and Jay were on quite friendly terms, I didn't think anything would mind if I snuck into her room to drop off her present. If anyone confronted me, I could just show them the bag, explain it was a surprise present, something from her youth she'd really love, and hey, presto, who's going to stop a thing like that from happening? Not a soul saw me as I walked down the hall and knocked on her door. We very rarely locked those doors back then, and it was a real community way of living, so even when we went out, we'd leave them open for people to pop in, borrow something, drop off a DVD they borrowed, whatever. In short, I'm practically buzzing with excitement because she's going to walk into her room and see Molly doll sat on her bed, looking right up at her. I had to wait an entire afternoon before Jay came back from lectures, and I was practically shaking with excitement by the time I heard her walking down the hall. But when she opened up her door, I didn't hear any happy, surprised sounds. I just heard screaming and crying. By the time I had the guts to emerge from my room, Jay was crying her eyes out in her friend's room. I mean, she was utterly inconsolable. I didn't know what I'd done wrong at the time, and my therapist says that realizing what I did wrong is a huge part of my treatment plan. There's just one thing I don't tell him, though. One thing I keep quiet about out of pure shame. Jay had been so freaked out by the Molly doll not because it reminded her of her Nana, not because it was such a sudden surprise to see something she'd thought was forever lost. It was the fact that even though Jay was just 11 years old when her Nana passed, she requested that she be buried with the Molly doll. Her logic being that it could keep Nana company until she could join her in heaven. Just about the sweetest thing my therapist had ever heard. I think it's kind of dumb, but I also understand that that's a problem with me, and not a problem with her, or anyone else who harbors sentimental feelings. Eventually, I told Jay the truth about who bought the doll. She was so angry that she punched me in the nose, which made me so angry that I wanted to kill her. I don't mean that in some abstract metaphorical way. I mean, I was out buying a plastic tarp to wrap her body in when I had a kind of come-to-Jesus moment, as the Americans say. The rest is history, I suppose, and here I am, on a plethora of different prescription antipsychotics, just trying to mimic the life of a normal human being. It's not been easy, coming to terms with who or what I am, but it's been worth it. I don't want to live like that anymore. I can't. Because if I allow myself to, I know it'll only be a matter of time before I hurt someone in a way that can never, ever be fixed. I was a fresh-faced graduate from high school. The summer before I left for UT, I took a construction job. I had a full scholarship for my first 2 years, but having a full wallet would help pay for the small things. Most of the other guys were friendly and entertaining. A day didn't pass where we weren't doubled over in laughter because of something someone did or said. 2 of the guys were exceptionally funny. Mark and Daniel had been working on separate sites or together for the past 15 years. They were both grade A practical jokers, but sometimes Mark would take things a little too far. Daniel was more than often the target of his humor. This would become a source of tension between the two, but they always made up by the end of the workday. As you may expect, eventually Mark's joking would go too far for Daniel to overlook. That day just happened to be on my final week on the job. For some time, everyone on the site had noticed Daniel wasn't himself. He spent long periods of time somewhere talking on his phone. When he wasn't gone, he seemed constantly agitated. His usual happy-go-lucky manner had disappeared. We'd all tried our best to make him laugh, but nothing had worked. Not even Mark could do it. As time went on, we all began to believe his troubles were about his girlfriend. When Mark heard about this, he couldn't stop himself from poking at the sore spot. On this day, Daniel had gone on the phone, and when he came back, Mark started joking around. "What's wrong, Danny boy? Are you having troubles at home? Is your old lady getting the bone from the mailman?" The verbal jabs only served to annoy Daniel even further. He said nothing. Instead, he just stared at Mark like he was going to burn through him with his eyes. Mark wasn't going to let his bad mood get in the way of getting a laugh. After lunch and throughout the rest of the day, Mark continued on with his jokes. Daniel, a guy who usually said something when he was fed up, held his tongue the whole day. I knew if he didn't put a stop to Mark's poking, he would take things too far and cause a problem, maybe even a fight, I thought. Daniel was clearly not in any mood to let the remarks roll off his back. And as quitting time arrived, I relaxed. I was almost sure Mark would let up. Unfortunately, things only got worse. A lot worse. It was quitting time. We were going around the site picking up our tools and cleaning any trash we'd left behind. Everyone was focused on the task at hand. I was off in my own little world, thinking about any last-minute things I needed to do before I left for school. When everything was complete, we were all standing around discussing our plans for the forthcoming weekend. It had been a while since Mark had made any jokes, and I assumed he'd stop for the day. When his turn came, he looked very serious and said, "Well, I think since old Danny's going fishing, I'll go over to his place and give his old lady some boning." The joke had come by complete surprise to all of us, and we all fell over ourselves laughing. All but Daniel, of course. I saw a snarl appear across his face. His teeth were gritted so tightly it looked like they'd crumble any second.
"I'm so sick of your stupid jokes."
No sooner had he said this, Daniel stepped forward with his hammer drawn back. I was precariously close to Mark at the time. I stumbled back so quickly I fell onto my butt. I looked up just as Daniel brought the claw end of the hammer into Mark's skull. Mark immediately fell over seizing. Writhing around on the floor, I was in shock, and I froze where I was. I watched Daniel for his next move. He stood over Mark's convulsing body for a moment, surveying his handiwork, I suppose. I was relieved when he calmly walked over to a bench and just sat down. I don't think I could have moved had he come at me. Just like me, the other guys were frozen in place watching as Mark's body slowly came to a limp halt. And we all looked at each other, too terrified to speak. Daniel broke the silence for us. I guess y'all should call the cops. I'm not gonna run off or anything, I'm just a little fed up." The resignation in his voice showed just how far gone he was. The old Daniel I knew wouldn't have done anything like this. We did like he asked, and he didn't give the cops any trouble when it came time to take him away. I thought the shock was affecting me at that moment, but even now, I don't feel anything but sorry for Daniel. It would come out later just how bad things had been going on at home. His girlfriend at the time had cheated on him more than once. She had blamed it all on him, and he had been working 2, sometimes 3 jobs just to keep her happy and keep up with expenses. He was neck deep in love and too blind to realize what was happening until it already had happened. After all he did to give her what she wanted, she had the nerve to complain about him being gone so much. When he was at work, all he could think about was, is she with another guy right now? He was too private to share any of this with us. I don't think Mark had any idea what was truly occurring. He took a shot, and when he saw that he'd hit a nerve, he rode it into the ground. And he did that a lot, and I suppose this turned out to be one too many. I'm sometimes still in shock when I sit back and think about how quickly his life left his body, even in those last few convulsing moments. All of us offered to serve as character witnesses, but it turned out not to be necessary. A deal was struck and Daniel agreed to serve 15 years. He's been offered parole in the intervening years, but declined it. With his release date soon approaching, I hope he's able to get his life back together and move beyond the shadow of this crime of passion, I suppose you could say. I've saved the most important person in the story for last. Mark's story obviously ended on that job site. Some readers may wonder why Daniel had received so much sympathy and Mark so little. Well, the truth is, although he was a really funny guy, that was about all he had going for him. I said already how far he would push Daniel with his joking. Heck, some folks may call it bullying these days, and I'd say they'd be right. He didn't do that to just Daniel. Not one of us evaded his comedic jabs, and that was far from his worst trait, though. Even around a bunch of East Texas rednecks, Mark's racism was off-putting. Like with his jokes, not a single culture was off-limits, and he wasn't afraid to say it. I won't even get into his views on women. I'll just sum it up by saying Mark was not a good person. Funny people tend to get away with things us other folks can't. However, even when you're making people laugh, there's a line, and unfortunately for Mark, he crossed it. One time too many.